The other thing that I think is causing him a problem is Joe Biden arguing. Which one should we start with, 2 or 3?
Oh God, this is
Well, let's start with 3. Here's 3. This is Joe Biden saying, I never proposed a freeze on Social Security.
Do you think, though, that it's fair for voters to question your commitment to Social Security when in the past you proposed a freeze to it?
No, I didn't propose a freeze. Look, we're talking about at the time. You mean when we went together and decided?
Yeah, you talked about it in the context of balancing the budget.
No,
so is that something that voters should be?
It was in the context of we saved Social Security during the Reagan administration was about to go under, and everyone from Teddy Kennedy on voted for that to save Social Security.
Okay.
There we go.
Here, let's play the clip. And you can see what the date of this is. What is that? 95, wow. Which incidentally, I am bad at math, but is over a decade, over 10 years after the time that he's claimed. It was true during the Reagan administration, the Senate, everybody went along with it. They raised taxes on the Social Security taxes in anticipation of the baby boom, getting into retirement. And they raised the taxes. They have not raised the cap sufficiently since then, but that did increase the amount of money available in the trust fund and deal with this sort of glut of people that we had that were born after the war. Here's Joe Biden. This is over 10 years later. He's bragging about this. He's not talking about the same thing.
When I argued that we should freeze federal spending, I meant Social Security as well. I meant Medicare and Medicaid. I meant veterans benefits. I meant every single solitary thing in the government. And I not only tried it once, I tried it twice, I tried it a third time, and I tried it a fourth time.
Wow. That's maybe he doesn't remember. I don't know.
Bernie needs to take that ad.
Oh, well, but here, look, and so here is Biden now again.
Oh, that is so crazy. He's like,
sort of backtracking because apparently he didn't realize that C-SPAN is available.
Well,
and that becomes a problem.
Issues, so.
Actually in real contention to get the whole nomination.
This fight with Bernie Sanders over Social Security, you've said that he, quote, doctored video of you from the Senate back in the day talking about Social Security, but you did argue that cost of living adjustments as part of a general spending freeze were necessary to cut federal spending and reduce the deficit. That aside,
that was 20 years ago.
Even if Sanders is playing a little rough here and your position has changed, what about those Democratic voters who say...
It hasn't changed.
What about those Democratic voters who say that Bernie's been consistent this whole time?
Well, he hasn't been, but I'm not going to attack Bernie. He hasn't even been consistent on Social Security. But here's the deal. I've laid out clearly what my plan for Social Security is. I'm going to increase Social Security benefits. I'm going to raise taxes for people making over $400,000 so they pay the same tax on every dollar you pay at your salary, or at $100,000 or $50,000 or $40,000. That will, in fact, allow us to get those folks who are outliving their Social Security in terms of benefits, be able them to increase their benefits. Those families where a spouse dies and the total Social Security goes down, increase their benefits.
All right. I mean, the plan that he's proposing with the donut hole, I might drop it a little bit lower, but I mean that above 400,000. I mean, the bottom line is the reason why we're taking in less income for Social Security is because of huge wealth disparity. And good plan, but he's lying about his record. Yeah. And it is true that Sanders has not been totally consistent. At sometimes he said he wants to increase Social Security, and at other times he says, I want to increase Social Security more than that. But that's it. At one point he said the word adjustment, and it was clear what he was saying was increase.
It's unreal.
That's what they're hanging all it on is he said adjustment.
He said adjustment, but bookended in like that same year, he called for increases. Yeah. So he's saying we should adjust Social Security.
It's not working. It's just not working.
It's not resonating. Here's Sanders responding to this is this weekend. And, I'm struck by this because, we'll do this and I'll talk in a second.
Let me ask you about Vice President Joe Biden. He is looking for an apology for a video circulated by your campaign that he says takes his position on Social Security out of context. Will you apologize?
No, of course I won't. Not on that one, I won't. For many, many years as a United States Senator, Joe Biden has been on the floor and elsewhere talking about the need to freeze or cut Social Security benefits. He voted for the balanced budget amendment.
So you believe it is wrong that Vice President Biden supported a freeze of cost of living adjustments in Social Security?
Absolutely. Bad vote. I voted against it. There are ways to raise money in order to protect the working families of this country. Cutting Social Security ain't one of them.
I mean, that's good for him.
Yep.
And what strikes me is how salient Social Security remains. Mm-hmm. Barack Obama, I'm convinced, and I haven't found. I got to maybe dig around for this a little bit. But Barack Obama, the way that he, in addition, obviously all the stuff in the ground game, but in terms of rhetoric, going into the Iowa caucus, he started talking about Social Security, and there was no. There was no difference between the candidates in terms of like their Social Security votes. They had never taken votes for Social Security. They probably were all on the same page of like, we need to sort of cut Social Security, or to the extent that anybody had indicated anything. But what he did is he said Social Security was in a crisis. Now, I did not like this, obviously, because Social Security was not in a crisis. And I don't like that type of rhetoric. I'm just talking about in the context of what he did. Mm-hmm. He said it was in crisis, and just by saying that it was in crisis, without sort of even talking about a solution necessarily, I think it gained him a lot of votes just because he acknowledged he created a problem.
That's right.
That people didn't necessarily know existed, or, didn't exist, mm-hmm. but that they assumed, okay, he's on it, and I care so much about my Social Security. I want the person who's so focused on Social Security, they're aware that there's a problem, they're going to help me deal with it. I mean, mm-hmm. I found that fascinating, and it. I think that's what's happening here, except for there is a much greater sort of distinction between the two candidates in terms of the way they have approached Social Security in the past.
Well, it's so crazy to me that we are having essentially what used to be I don't mean like 40 years ago. I mean, even lockbox. Remember the lockbox with Gore and Bush? I mean, these were conversations Democrats had against Republicans.
Yep.
Biden probably, even though he voted in the 90s, he probably even had these conversations against Republicans until it didn't suit him, or the DLC came in and said, switch your tactics. We got to balance the budget, whatever.
I mean, even when Gore was talking about lockbox, they were still talking about balance in the budget.
Of course.
I mean,
yeah,
the lockbox was more just sort of like, let's not allow cuts to Social Security because they've already, the lockbox actually referred back to what Bush subsequently later, I don't know if you remember this, but he went to the Treasury Department, did a press op in the Treasury Department, surrounded by file cabinets. He said,
oh my God,
this is where your Social Security's gone. It's just IOUs. Open up one of these drawers. See, it just says IOU. That's nothing.
Wow, I remember this.
Yes, and this is the way that that Bush was trying to privatize Social Security. And then everybody sort of understood, like, oh, that's what he meant by lockbox, as in the money that's owed, that you cannot allow the general budget to raid from the Social Security Trust Fund to borrow money, because later the Republicans are going to try and default on those loans.
That is brilliant. That's like some messaging,
that Bush did?
Era. Yeah, Bush era, of course, was the messaging was key, but standing in front of a bunch of response?
It did not work. It did not work. They tried to privatize Social Security. That's the thing. That Social Security has such a salience, and that is why.
But it wasn't during the election. It was once he was in office.
Once he was in office.
Okay, so I thought it was an electoral.
Oh, no.
I don't remember this.
No, this was in 2004, 2005 or something like that. But I guess the thing that I don't know that the voters know yet, and maybe this is like the second act of this sort of play, is to say that Joe Biden's perspective on Social Security is going to be a liability against Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Because Donald Trump could play the same video.
That's right.
And Donald Trump could say, like, I've never tried to cut Social Security.
And the interesting thing about Social Security is older voters who were around and may actually remember this are going to be reminded of this. It's not like you're speaking to a new...
I don't think there was anybody at the time that they were listening to that was saying, like, this is a problem.
This is it, yeah.
It was just taken for granted largely that the only way to deal with this problem is to, is to cut or do, I mean, that's why the Obama administration for 3, maybe 4 years, 3.5, basically we're putting on the table cuts to Social Security in this way. Mm-hmm. Cuts in the increase of cost of living, which, or I should say, cuts in the form of lowering the cost of living adjustments, and which is, of course, a cut unless you have massive deflation of pharmaceutical prices, which we have not had and we were never going to have. All right, we got to take a break. Head into